Like, these games are great. We just don't get to the table very often.
You know, and I want to say we're going to change, but probably won't.
We're not. What's up, everybody? My name is Nick.
I'm Mike.
We are the Buzzmurf, and that's right. Today we're going to talk about 10 amazing games that just we rarely play. And by rarely, I think it's got to be like at least year and a half plus in between us playing them.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. There's maybe one exception of a game that makes it about yearly, but you know, when you collect a bunch of games and are, you know, for our job covering new games, sometimes it's hard to go back and play these ones, even though we can acknowledge we love them and they are objectively great games.
And even if you do love a game, sometimes you only want to play it once a year. So these should be 10 games that we absolutely love. Like, they're like in our top 100s.
Yeah.
But, you know, we rarely play.
Number 10 on our list is London. Now, this is on our list of we don't play it very often games simply because I love this game. Nick does not like this game. This might be literally Nick's least favorite game. I think he's wrong about that. So I'm just like, I'm putting it on the list anyway, because it is a great game. At least half of us agree. And this is a game where you are rebuilding London after the Great Fire. You are trying to manage playing out these cards and then kind of like running your city. And in that, you're trying to manage poverty and kind of bringing wellness to your people. But the kind of poverty can stack up heavily against you and become a big problem. And you also have to take loans and stuff and pay that off by the end of the game. So it's really about managing your money and sort of like managing the costs of what it takes to run a city. There's a lot of costs that are involved in things. And so you're trying to kind of get over that hump and build up this engine of cards by playing them down in your tableau so that you can kind of start making more than you're spending. And it's really about kind of getting over that point, and now you're into profits and kind of prosperity and stuff. I think that's a really interesting, fun challenge every time. Like, it's so brutal right now. How do I get there? How do I get over this hump? And for Nick, that is it's more punishing than it is fun to overcome. So that's why it doesn't get played very often, but it's a game I think is really cool.
Our number 9 is Mechs vs. Minions. Mechs vs. Minions is a really big game, as you can see, and I honestly don't really have much of a reason of why this doesn't get to the table, because one thing about Mechs vs. Minions is it's made by Riot Games, who have the money to make insane games. And granted, they've only made like 2, but this one, it's laid out very well. It has a really nice insert on the inside. It's actually pretty easy to get to the table, but this is set in the League of Legends universe, which is where they made their billions of dollars. And it's a cooperative game, cooperative programming game, and you are mechs, and you're trying to fulfill some kind of mission. There are different scenarios, different missions that you are doing, and you are trying to sometimes bring something somewhere, sometimes just trying to protect like the school. You're trying to do a whole bunch of different stuff, and are waves and waves and waves of minions coming through, and you're trying to have them not overrun you, basically. But it's really, really fun because you're programming out your movements. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna move, and then I'm gonna turn, and then I'm gonna hit, and then I'm gonna turn, and then I'm gonna move, and you're programming your thing out, and you can kill minions by either doing some kind of attack or just running right over them, because they're the little minions, and you're in a big old mech. And it's very, very fun. It's very cooperative because you can like push each other and like bump each other out of the way, which can be beneficial. But every time you're getting hit and you're getting damaged, you're basically gonna have to put a random damage card, for the most part, into your program somewhere. And that might be like, you just turn. And so now your thing is messed up. And so you might end up in a totally different place than you were kind of expecting. It's really, really fun. And I don't honestly know why we don't play it more. We've actually never gotten through all the way through the campaign. We've gotten through a decent amount of it, but it's kind of got like a little campaign element to it. And for some reason, we just haven't got all the way through it. I don't entirely know why, but it's really, really fun. And I wish we got it to the table more often. But I think maybe just because it is so big that it kind of feels like, do we really want to break out Mechs vs. Minions? When it's like, it's really not that hard to get to the table. So hopefully we can get it to the table a little bit more, but it's an outstanding game that we just rarely play.
Number 8 is Seasons. This is a game that falls in the category for us of we just forget about. It's, you know, a game we've had for a very long time, and we forget how much we enjoy it. Then every time we play it, we literally have that moment of like, this is so good, why don't we play this more? And then we inevitably forget again, and so it goes. But Seasons is a game where you are rolling out and drafting dice every turn, and you have 4 sets of dice that will pertain to the 4 seasons. As you're moving through 3 years, you're going from spring to summer to autumn and things like that, or starting off in winter, I believe. And you are gonna have different dice depending on what season you're on, and you're gonna be drafting these dice to gain elements. So these elements are going to be your resources that you ultimately play your cards with, and certain elements are more prominent in certain seasons and are less prominent or not available in other seasons. So in summer, the fire element is the most available for use, or you expect to roll those on the dice if the dice go your way. And you are doing all these kind of resource management things to build a tableau of cards in front of you that are going to give you your main hit of points. They might give you in-game abilities, one-time effects, and all these different things to kind of generate as many crystals, which are your points, as possible. This game has a really fond, you know, it sits in our hearts well, because this is the first game that we ever did card drafting with. You, in the game, if you're playing a 2-player game, get 18 cards, and you go back and forth choosing one at a time, and you ultimately have 9 cards, and you order them into 3 piles, and you get 1 pile per year in the game. That was the first time we had ever experienced anything of that nature. And at first we were super intimidated by the prospect of drafting cards, and it became super fun because you're trying to build a really synergistic tableau of cards out in front of you. This game is just one that satisfies every single time you play it. There's so many ways you can mitigate and change things. You can move time backward. There's all sorts of cards you can play, all sorts of combos you can build, and it's really, really fun to try to maximize synergies every single time.
Our number 7 is gonna be Suburbia. Suburbia is one of my favorite games. I think it was still, we recently did our top 100. I think it was in my top 10 of all time. So I still really, really enjoy Suburbia. We just don't, I don't know, we just don't play it very often. I think this is mostly due to the fact that we've just had this game for a very long time. We've played it many, many, many times. And so it just doesn't get to the table too often. Once every couple years, year and a half, somewhere in there. And we still really, really love it though. This is a game where you're building out a suburb. Fun fact, this is actually the first hobby game I ever played, which is cool. Again, we've been playing it for a while, but you are building out a suburb. And one of the reasons why I brought that up is because one of the reasons why this game grabs me so much, because I love how thematic it was. This is a game that kind of the first really thematic board game, especially like Euro game that I played, because you're building out a suburb with these hexagonal tiles. And when you place a tile, you're going to be changing different stuff in your little community there. You're going to be changing mostly your income and your reputation. Your reputation is going to give you population. That's what you want. You want people in your suburb. And your income is going to give you money, obviously. But all of the tiles change your income and your reputation in ways that make sense for that tile, because these tiles are like a fast food restaurant, a gas station, a freeway, an office building, residential housing, things like that. And everything in the game usually has to do with adjacency. So you want a freeway next to blue tiles, because blue tiles are the kind of like business district. Again, like the office buildings, the building supply store, things like that. It's all the kind of businessy stuff that people are going to commute to. And so you want the freeway next to those. And the freeway might give you like +1 income for every blue tile that's adjacent to this hex tile. And I was like, when I first played it, I was just like, that makes sense. Like that totally makes sense. You want the freeway next to blue tiles. Yep, that actually totally makes sense. You want the fast food restaurant next to green tiles, because the green tiles are residential tiles, and that's where the people are. That's where people are gonna go eat. You don't want airports next to green tiles because it's gonna be loud, and so your reputation is going to go down. There's all these different things that all just make sense. Every single tile, the adjacency rules that are on that tile make sense for whatever that tile is. And the first time I played this, it blew my gourd. I was just like, that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, I totally get that. That's so cool. And I just love it. I love Suburbia. I still think it's an outstanding game. It's one of my favorite games ever made. We've just played it a long time, played it many, many times. And so we just don't get it to the table very often. But that once every year and a half, 2 years that we play it, I go, oh my gosh, that's right. I love Suburbia.
Next up is Zombicide Black Plague, specifically, is the one version of Zombicide we still own. Zombicide is a game where, you're heroes and you're running against like literal hordes of zombies that are rushing toward you and using weaponry to keep them at bay and ultimately achieve whatever scenario objective you have that you're playing. And this is a game that, purely falls into we don't have time typically to set up a scenario, put a bunch of minis out, move those minis around. It's a game that, will take up an afternoon for yourself. So we don't play it that often as a result. It's just kind of, one of those ones that mentally is, you got to gear up for, at least for us. This represents the last Zombicide game we played. There's now, of course, been a bajillion more versions of Zombicide since we last stopped collecting, but this was always our favorite. We really like the kind of medieval theme. They changed up, they smoothed out some things mechanically. They gave you these awesome player dashboards with this version. So bookkeeping was really, made even more easy. So it's kind of the one we've stuck with since then. This is one that we always really enjoy when we play. Like Zombicide was one of the first things we ever backed on Kickstarter, even before I'd say we were like hobbyists, before we were truly deeply into this hobby. We had a few games. We had Catan, we had Pandemic, and we had Zombicide. So we were at least aware of like that Kickstarter exists and board games are on it, but we did not know about the wider world of board games yet. So this was like the early seasons of Zombicide was one of the reasons why we got into this hobby. So for that reason, it always has, a fond spot on our shelf, but it is one that we don't play as often.
Our number 5 is going to be Return to Dark Tower. Return to Dark Tower doesn't get to the table very often, just out of sheer intimidation. That tower, this big old tower, look at it, is very, very intimidating. It's ultimately a very big game that's not that hard to get playing once you get into it, but this is kind of one of those games that we really, really love, but every time we play it, we kind of have to relearn it to some degree. We all have that, right? Like put down in the comments, what's a game you have to relearn every single time you play it? Return to Dark Tower is one of those. So we've only played it a couple times, but we really, really enjoy it. This game, this is a restoration game, so it's a remake of Dark Tower, which is I think from the 80s. This is a game where you're gonna be dropping things into this big tower. You're gonna be dropping these skulls, and those are gonna be like corruption, but the tower has all these chutes out of it, and it's a big kind of cube tower, so you don't really know where things are gonna come out. Sometimes they might get trapped behind doors, and throughout the game, you'll have to like lift up doors, and sometimes skulls come pouring out into the world. It's really, really fun, because every time you drop something in there, you have no idea where it's gonna go, and it's just really, really good. But this is a game, it's an app-assisted game, and so the app is going to be running like the enemies and kind of what they're doing, and it's gonna be running the story. And the story, you're gonna have some kind of quest. You're going around trying to kind of like mitigate the corruption, do different things. Everyone has like an asymmetric character that has like different player abilities, and you're going around, and again, you're trying to fulfill this scenario. So eventually you're basically gonna have kind of like quests, I guess is kind of the best way to put it, where you're gonna have to do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. Eventually you're gonna go into the tower, not like physically, but like in the game you are, and then you're gonna have some kind of usually final thing that you're gonna have to do. It's really, really fun. The app assisted stuff works really, really well. And it's so cool because, I mean, the tower is like the main part, right? Because one of the cool things with the tower is the tower turns on the inside. You can't really see it because it has a casing on the outside, but sometimes you're like, oh, everything's fine, but the app goes and the tower awakens or whatever it says, and the tower inside starts turning. And when it starts turning, what might happen is some of those like skulls that are trapped somewhere else might come to an open door and then just pour out. And so every single time you're dropping stuff in the tower, anytime the tower does anything, it's just so exhilarating. It's so exciting. It's so fun. And I wish we got at the table more. This is just one of those games we want to play with a full 4 players. We want to like really sit down, have an entire evening or an entire afternoon, just like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're gonna play. It's gonna take a couple hours and it's gonna be epic and fun. And unfortunately, we just don't have many opportunities to do that. Mike has a child, as you know, and so like there's not as many of those opportunities, but whenever it does happen, it's amazing. And so I love Return to Dark Tower. I wish we could get played more, but it's just one of those games where it's like, we're never gonna get to play this very much until we're retired, and hopefully the game still works then.
Next up is Tidal Blade's Heroes of the Reef. This is an awesome world A game that started with a world and then kind of had a game developed around it by Mr. Cuddington here, this kind of water world with these cool alien, creatures and stuff going around on jet skis, super fun. This is a game where you are essentially like American Gladiators. You're doing stunts and kind of, trials and things to prove your mettle to become, this hero, a tidal blade, like the tidal blades of old that fought off these monsters. And even in this game, you kind of have these monsters that are, this threat of the past are starting to show up again. So you're actually going in and doing a little bit of real combat and stuff while you're kind of putting on these shows, these exhibitions. This is a game that for us, we really enjoy. We got to play it way back when it was first on crowdfunding 1,000 years ago, and then got the game and had this kind of interesting journey where when we first received the game, the actual finished copy of the game that we have here, we were kind of like, oh, I don't know if I like this game as much as I thought it was. It's so big and there's so many things to set up and it's really kind of difficult and I can't manage my dice well. And then we kind of stuck with it and played a few more times and then realized that it's more strategic than maybe you would think based on how kind of splashy the production is. And one that we've kind of really grown fond of over the years. Now, again, as always, you'll see, if you haven't noticed already, a trend with this list is just simply time management. This one's big, it's large, it takes a bit to set up, it's a lot of components and things, so we don't play it that often, but it's one that we really try to make sure that we keep in our mind and set aside time. So of all the games that we kind of really enjoy but don't play that often, this one probably hits the table a little bit more than the others. Because for whatever reason, we just stay committed to making sure that it doesn't get too much dust collected on it before we dust it off again.
Our number 3 is Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. We're large Lord of the Rings fans, as you can see. We have on our shelves just constantly just weird Lord of the Rings stuff. Remember these cups? Did anyone else have these cups? These cups from weren't they from McDonald's or something? I love it. Shouts out to Matthew Jude who got us these. We still have some at our house, some of the original ones. But nonetheless, Lord of the Rings Journeys to Middle-earth is an absolute game. It's essentially kind of like a new version-ish of Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. It uses the same system, I guess is what I should say, but it has Lord of the Rings on it. So this is a game that's app-assisted, where the app is going to take you through these different scenarios. The scenarios themselves will be more or less the same in terms of generally what you're doing, but the way the board builds out what enemies are where, which enemies there are, that might always be different from game to game. Even if you're playing the same scenario over and over, it might be changing up because the app will change it up naturally, which is really, really cool. And it's Lord of the Rings. So you're going through the story, you're taking on I think usually when we were playing, Mike was like, I was Gimli because I'm a big dwarf fan. I think Mike was Legolas, or maybe he was Boromir. And so you're playing through a scenario, you're doing different stuff. And this is one of those games where every time at the end of a game, whether you win or lose that game, you will be moving on. You don't get to replay stuff. You're gonna have to go through the story regardless. So if you lose, things are gonna change farther down the line. There's a lot of games that kind of do that now, but this one's really, really fun. The game itself is relatively simple. The stuff you're trying to do, you're gonna be flipping over these cards you have. They're gonna have a certain amount of successes on them usually. And so that's kind of the way you're succeeding at the things you're doing. All the characters are different. You will get more different as time goes on, as you get different equipment and all those kinds of things. And it's just Lord of the Rings, so we freaking love it. And this is a game where we have played the first scenario of this game 6 different times, because every time we want to show it to someone, they're new to the game. So we go, let's just start over. And then we'll all play this through together, which of course we won't. You never get to play all the way through campaign games together. At least we never do. We never get to play campaign games. And so because of that, this game just kind of sits on the shelf. It doesn't get played very often, but every once in a while we have someone who wants to play it. So we start over, play the first 2 scenarios like we always do, love it, and then don't get to play it again for a long time. And so I love this game. Someday, Mike and I will go through this whole dang campaign. I want to get the expansions. I want to go through those 2. Who knows when it's going to happen? I hope the app still works when it does. But nonetheless, I love this game and I really, really want to play it more. I wish we could play it more often, but alas, we just don't get to, but it's absolutely amazing.
Number 2 on this list is Tuat and Suyu, the Inca Empire from Board and Dice. This is a big worker placement game where you have all of these on the central board, all of these possible worker placement spots. It's really kind of overwhelming to look at when you first see it, but as you kind of learn and figure out what you want to do, things kind of zoom in a little bit and you can kind of make sense of everything you're doing. This is a game that I think we're really surprised by. We were obviously already fans of Board and Dice, and we knew that, we like their stuff, but this one seemed really difficult. It's heavy. David Turczi doesn't mess around. They design heavy games. And this one, again, has that kind of overwhelming look. And as we got into it and played it, we played it first, I think, on Tabletopia in early COVID days, and we got to play it physically. When we played it physically, it really kind of clicked for us. And we're like, oh, now I get it. I can see how you can actually, manipulate stuff on the board and get things done and all of that jazz. And then it really became one of our favorite Board and Dice games, if not maybe our favorite overall of all the things they've done. This is one that I don't even know if we have a good explanation for why we don't play it more. It's Euro-tastic, which is right into our stylings. It's really fun. It's different every time. It's got a cool expansion with different modules. There's really a lot to like and a lot to explore, but we just don't play it that often, maybe because it is a heavy game. And so it's one of those ones that, if you have some time to play recreationally, this one is your heavy game for the day. You're not going to line up another heavy one after that. And so I think sometimes if we're going to play 2 or 3 games, we're like, this might be a little too heavy, because then everything else we play will want to keep it pretty light and casual or something like that. So it's this interesting kind of tough one to plan out in your game night. But every time we do play it, we really like it.
There might be a theme here. We like Lord of the Rings stuff, and we like these big box games that we don't get to play very often. War of the Ring is our number 1. If you know us, you probably saw this one coming. I love War of the Ring. I'm not a big kind of troops on a map war game kind of person, but the theme of this one carries me through. As you know, we've talked about already, we are massive Lord of the Rings fans. This is a game that we don't get to play very often, not so much because it's difficult. It is a big game. It's got a lot of rules, but whenever I play it, I'm always surprised at how not that hard it is. It's tough. There's a lot of rules, but I don't know. It works pretty smoothly. This is just a game that it's so big, it's so epic that I honestly, even if I had the opportunity to play it every single weekend, I still would probably only play it once every year or two, because this is a game where it's this huge epic experience, but I really only want the War of the Ring experience once every year or two. And I love it for that. It's still one of my favorite games, and I still only really want to play it that much. You don't always want to play your favorite game, And so War of the Ring is Lord of the Rings in a box. You are telling the story of the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, not all of Lord of the Rings, obviously. But you're kind of telling your own version. It's a 2-player game. One player is playing the Shadow Army, so the Sauron, Isengard, and the Easterlings, Haradrim and the Easterlings. And the other side is playing the Free People, so the Dwarves, the Elves, the Northmen, Gondor, Rohan, all that kind of stuff. And then one side, you're playing the Free People, so you also have the Fellowship, and your goal is to trying to destroy the ring. You can also get a military victory as the Free People, but it's very difficult to do so. You're mostly trying to destroy the ring. Whereas the Shadow Army is either trying to corrupt the ring bearers, so I think 12 corruption, you will win that way, or you can get a military victory, and it's easier for you to get a military victory because you're just all military might. And so that's what you're trying to do. The ring bearers are kind of sneaking around. You don't really know where they are if you're the Shadow Army. And then as the Shadow Army, you're just trying to overwhelm the Free Peoples. You have kind of inexhaustible forces. Every time some of your troops die, they just go right back to your pile, ready to come back in, because you just have tons and tons and tons of troops. You will literally never run out. Whereas the Free People, every single time one of your people die, they're gone. You will never ever get them back. And it's a big deal. So when you have a big battle, it's a big, big deal, especially for the Free People, but really for both sides. It's just so fun. It's so well done. But you get to tell your own version of this story, because you start off the Fellowship with all 9 members of the Fellowship. Frodo and Sam obviously have to stay the whole time, but everyone else can leave or stay however the player wants. There's been times where I've won the game with Merry, Frodo, and Sam on Mount Doom. That's how it was. Sometimes Boromir has gone all the way to Mount Doom with with Frodo and Sam. So you can tell your own story. You're like, no, in this one, Gandalf is gonna leave really late, and then instead of going to like Gondor, he's gonna go up to the Shire, and he's gonna help out in like Angmar and stuff like that. It's really, really, really cool. You get to tell this beautiful, unique story. It's got a bunch of Lord of the Rings deep cuts. It's amazing. And I honestly don't want to play it very often because it's just, I don't always need that experience, but whenever I am in the mood for that, oh, it hits different, y'all. It hits different, and that's why it's our number one.
All right, that's 10 games that we love, but don't play often enough.
It's true.
And again, I'd like to say we're going to change, but we're not.
And let's be honest, everyone is like this. So down in the comments, let us know what's a game that you really love, but you rarely play, either because you have the player count, or maybe it's because you're like, hey, I talk about War of the Ring. I'm like, I don't want to play War of the Ring more than one a year.
It's too much.
I don't really want to.
It's too much.
Hi.
All right, so that is going to be our list. Get your picks in the comments below, and just know that my daughter here, she's not ashamed of you, so you shouldn't be either.